So friends, in this video we are starting a new topic. The title is registration for the purpose of GST. Friends, who require registration for the purpose of GST? I can tell you in two words. One is a person eligible to avail input tax credit, and number two, who is liable to pay tax. Only two categories are liable. Right? It's a long chapter, lots of statutory provisions are covered therein. So in the beginning I am giving you two charts, and these two charts are a summary of the entire chapter, and if you remember this, you remember the whole chapter. Right? So in this chapter we have CGST Act. And in the Act we have section 22 to section 30. And then we have rules. Rules are CGST rules. These are rule number 8 to rule number 26. Right? As far as Act is concerned, this we can divide in two parts. One is for registration and another is for cancellation of registration. For the purpose of cancellation, two sections are there. This is section 29 and section 30. Two sections are relevant for this purpose. For the purpose of registration, this again I will divide it in three parts, and this is section 22, this is section 23, and this is section 24. Under section 23, this is the case of registration not required. So certain suppliers never need registration for the purpose of GST. And under section 24, in this case, registration is always required. It is always required. So whatever be the turnover, irrespective of that, registration is always needed. And under section 22, this is turnover based registration. In addition to turnover, some more information is also given in section 22. Right? And then we have section 25. This talks about procedure for registration. Then under section 26, this is deemed registration. Under section 27, this is registration of casual taxable person as well as non-resident taxable person. And section 28, this talks about amendment. Now when we say amendment, so this is the amendment of any information furnished at the time of registration. So all the sections are covered in this chart. Section 22 to section 30, and that we divide in two parts, that is registration and cancellation. Registration is under section 22, which is turnover based registration, or rather section 24, where registration is always compulsory. Section 23 says where registration is not required. The procedure for registration under section 25. Then section 26 is deemed registration. Section 27 talks about registration of the casual taxable person as well as non-resident taxable person, and section 28 that refers to amendments. Right? Now this is as far as Act is concerned. This is first chart. Now the second chart about the rules. Okay, I hope you have already copied this. So now moving to second chart. So CGST rules now. Now those rules again I will divide in three parts, but in the chart I am dividing that in two parts. These are the rules which are dealing with registration and the rules which are dealing with cancellation, right? So you can add this in the continuation of the previous chart also. So on the cancellation side you can write here, in the registration side you can write down the line. So in one page itself you have summary of the entire chapter. So this is for cancellation. We have rule number 20, which talks about application for cancellation. Application for cancellation. And then rule number 21, this talks about cancellation in certain cases. Cancellation in certain cases. So this is a case where the officer is having the authority to cancel the registration of the supplier in certain cases. And rule number 22, this talks about cancellation, that how and when the cancellation takes effect. And rule number 23, this talks about revocation of cancellation. So these are four rules which are related to cancellation of registration. Now in this we have rule number 8, which is talking about application for registration. Application for registration. Then rule number 9, that is referring to verification and approval. Verification and approval. Rule number 10, that refers to issue of registration certificate. Issue of registration certificate. Rule number 11 says separate registration for every vertical. For every vertical of business. And in the later part we'll talk about the registration is needed for in every state separately, and within the state also if you have different verticals of business, then separate registration is required for every vertical of business. Then rule number 12, this refers to registration of persons who are responsible for deduction of tax and source and who are responsible for collection of tax at source. So this is rule number 12. TDS provisions, those are applicable mainly to the government departments, and TCS provisions are applicable in relation to e-commerce. Then comes rule number 13. This talks about registration of NRTP. Registration of non-resident taxable person. How and when the registration should be obtained. So friends, as far as non-resident taxable person is concerned, as well as the another person who is required to have the registration, that is casual taxable person, they should apply for registration at least 5 days before starting the business. But any other person, he can apply for registration within 30 days after becoming liable for registration. So these are nitty-gritties involved, on those we will talk about later. But right now, why this is different? Because they need to apply before starting business, right? And other people can apply for registration within 30 days since becoming liable for registration. Now rule number 14, this relates to specifically OIDAR services from outside India. So online information and data access retrieval services, if the service provider happens to be outside India, then how and when he should obtain registration. Then rule number 15, this is extension of registration for casual taxable person as well as non-resident taxable person. So prima facie their registration is valid for a period of 90 days, but if required that can be extended for another period of 90 days. So this is relating to that extension of the registration. Then rule number 16, this is talking about suo motu registration. The officer can register the person by himself, and then the person should apply properly for getting the registration done. Rule number 17, this is relating to unique identity number. Unique identity number. Now this is relevant for foreign embassies and high commission. They are required to have a unique identity number, so whatever supplies are made to them, then they can take the credit through a unique identity number, and this amount is refundable to them. So refund to the foreign embassies and high commissions, that we are going to talk about in the chapter of refunds, but they need to have a unique identity number. Rule number 18, this talks about display of registration certificate. Display of registration certificate. So every person who is registered is required to display that thing. And number 19, this is relating to amendments. So friend, these are all the relevant rules. Rule number 18 to rule number 8 to rule number 23. Then remaining 3 rules are also there, 24, 25, 26. So those are about the migration of existing registered person for the purpose of excise, for the purpose of service tax, as well as under other laws. They are required to migrate. So that is covered in rule number 24. Then rule number 25 talks about physical verification of the premises, and rule number 26 talks about the method of authentication. So those are few more rules. So those also we can add. Actually those are required to be added after the closure, but since the space is left, or rather space is less, let me write those things here. So rule number 24, this is regarding migration. Rule number 25, this is physical verification. And rule number 26, this is about authentication. Okay, so this chart is complete list of all the provisions applicable. So instead of preparing a separate chart, you can add it in the previous chart itself. So on the registration side, these many rules; on the cancellation side, these many rules, and these 3 are independent rules which have nothing to do with these or these things. Okay, so in this lecture, in this video, I've just given you a summary of the entire chapter. So when we meet in the next video, we'll start formally with the registration, and that is starting with the statutory provisions of related to registration.